Thanks.
Yep.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us. My name is Kristen Ronay. I'm the Director of Compliance for the Ohio High School Athletic Association, and I'd like to welcome you to our first virtual of the fall administrator workshop. We have conducted 2 already in person that we felt were very successful, and we had about 70 attendees. Today, we're expecting around 140 attendees for this particular virtual session. So again, we really appreciate your time. Just a few logistical items before we get started. This is a live event, so there is about a 30-second delay with any questions that you might want to ask. Unfortunately, you're not able to ask those verbally, but any questions you have, please feel free to type those into the question and answer session, and we will make sure that those are communicated at the appropriate time and to the appropriate person, because we want to make sure you guys are getting your questions answered as well. I will note that this presentation is being recorded, so if for any reason you might need to step out or step away for a while, we will be posting this online and emailing it to our school administrators in the Friday update that we would send out next. So please know that that's going to be available. And I think that's all of the logistical items. So for right now, I'm going to turn it over to our Executive Director, Mr. Doug Ute. He's going to give us kind of an Executive Director update before we get into some of the other issues. So Mr. Ute, take it away.
Thank you, Kristen, and thanks, Kristen and Ronald, for organizing these events. As Kristen said, the first 2 we thought were very successful and got a lot of positive feedback from those who attended. And so thank you for your time today, but more importantly, thank you for what you do as an athletic administrator or just an administrator in a school district. And some of you know my background. I spent 37 years in public education, and I started as a teacher coach and a coach AD, and then a high school principal. And then the last 20 years I served as a school superintendent, 9 of those in Marion Elgin District in Marion County, and 11 of those years in Licking County at Newark. And so, I appreciate what you do and a leadership role in your school. And I think it is the single most important piece of community relations in a school district and the spot you're in. And I'll just take a couple minutes today to talk about that. I know as a school superintendent with an athletic background, I spent a lot of time in the athletic director's office just simply because that was my comfort zone. But more importantly, as a superintendent, I knew that those are things our community watched. And I know if you do it right and create relationships with those out in your community. And I've always said this, you never know who has a dump truck that'll get you a load of gravel or a load of sand, or you never know who knows somebody who has a construction company that can help you as you're doing things around to improve your facility. So I always encourage folks, and I used to tell my school board all the time, I'm working at those athletic events. And I would tell the athletic secretary, don't sit me in one seat, because I'm probably going to sit 7 different places. And number 1, because I like to talk to people. But number 2, I know how important it is to create those relationships with community members and parents at our athletic events. And so I encourage you, and I know how busy you are during those events, to make sure that everything goes off smoothly, because that's what your community is watching. And so, but I encourage you to take the time to walk around and get to know everybody in your facility and have those conversations with them, and because they'll pay dividends off down the road. So again, thank you for what you're doing. I know you're really busy now, and just a couple updates that I would share with you from our organization moving forward. So Bob Goldring will send out a communication today to all athletic directors in the state, and we're asking, not mandating, we're asking that you participate at your Friday night football game, or Saturday night, as some of you have, in a moment of silence for a young Navy medic who lost his life in Afghanistan last week with a bombing, and his name is Max Soviak. And he is from Milan Edison High School, where he was a 4-year member of the high school football team. And so Bob's sending out a public address announcement. You don't have to use that particular one, but we felt appropriate to honor Max and so many of those who have lost their life protecting us at our football games in the state this weekend. And so if you feel free to do so, but you are not obligated to do that. I think it mean a lot to the Edison school community as well as Max's family. And so that'll be coming out today. The most common asked question I've had the last week or week and a half is about the virus and what we are mandating and what we're not mandating. And I want to remind you that the Ohio High School Athletic Association does not mandate anything. That comes from the Ohio Department of Health in conjunction with the governor, and so we are in communication with the Ohio Department of Health. But again, all that stands is what was brought forth in August, is that you are mandated to wear a mask to and from school on a school bus and to and from athletic events on a school bus. After that, it's up to your local health department and your school. Some of the things, and I understand the situation that some of you, I felt like with 88 health departments, county health departments, and when you add the city ones in, there's 112 in the state. What local is going to look a lot different. And when you're in leagues that have different counties and those type of things, you know, we knew there'd be some fluctuation on that, and now we're getting some within the county because it's left up to your superintendent and your board of education to work with the health department on whether or not you mandate masks, who quarantines, those type of things. Please remember that those are local decisions with your local health departments, and the Ohio High School Athletic Association does not mandate any of those things. And again, we will continue to be in communication with the Ohio Department of Health and get you information as soon as we receive any that way. So with that, again, thank you for your leadership in your district. Thank you for what you're doing to make sure that your athletes are getting the opportunity to compete. And I know, you know, in the first 2 weeks, one of my goals this fall was to get out around Ohio. And, you know, I live in Central Ohio, but I just don't want to stay in Central Ohio and watch Friday night football or other events there. So I did watch Upper Arlington and Reynoldsburg week 1 at Upper Arlington, which was fun to watch. Communities come in. I walked up to the gate and there was a long line coming in, which was nice to see. And then I had an opportunity to go to Mentor and watch Mentor and St. Ignatius, which was what high school sports is all about, last Friday night, where there were 800 students and from Mentor and 500 from St. Ignatius, and not a seat left, and crowds wrapped around, and very competitive game with a lot of energy at it. And so that's good to see and good to put our kids in front of those type of environments. So thank you for what you do, and I appreciate you joining us today. With that, I'll turn it over to Ryan Demarest for a few words. Thanks, Ryan. Or excuse me, Ronald, should I ask for any questions first? Sorry, Ryan.
No worries, Doug. We are good with questions right now. Thanks for checking. Okay. Ryan, you're more than welcome to go.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for your time today. It's such an honor to be here in front of everyone, whether you're in your homes or at your schools, at your desks. Man, it feels good for high school football to be back. I was just at a high school football game in Georgia, Hartwell, Georgia, right in Atlanta, and I was checking out one of our projects. I work for a sports lighting company. We're called Ephesus Sports Lighting. We're owned by Cooper Lighting, and who is also owned by Signify Lighting. You may have heard of Philips Lighting before, and we are now the largest lighting company in the world as of early 2020 when we were acquired. Why I'm here? I'm here to let you know about our partnership with the OHSAA. And if you're probably going to tune me out unless you're concerned at your facility about the cost, controls and operation, or enhancing your fan experience and utilizing your facility in a more diverse way. If you're interested in doing this, I probably have a great product for you to be able to show you here today. and kind of walk you through how we can help you through cost, through improving your maintenance of your facilities, whether indoor or outdoor. And I'm just going to kind of roll through here. So I'm going to share my screen here. Here we go, Ronald. Just let me know, make sure everything comes through. Good to go?
Yep, you're good to go, Ryan. Thank you.
So when we're getting into, we at the beginning of this year, we became the official sports lighting provider of the OHSAA and NFHS. We're based in Syracuse, New York. We invented LED sports lighting. We first put it here in Syracuse, New York, home of the War Memorial, which is the feeder team, the Syracuse Crunch, which is the feeder team for the Tampa Bay Lightning. We've done Super Bowls, we've done local high schools. I mean, if you can think about what, I'm sure you recognize some of the logos that are up there on the screen. We were the first to bring LED sports lighting to all of these leagues and venues in these areas. I'll kind of give you an example of some of the types of venues we have, really where we're concerned about the player experience, lighting for the player being a current high school coach and a former high school and collegiate athlete. I firmly stand behind our product, knowing that we're going to be lighting for the athlete, having specific applications for indoor and gymnasiums versus football. There's different lighting that's needed, and you can kind of see some of the example of the collegiate facilities we've done at Duke, including Wallace Wade, the football stadium there at Duke, as well as Sanford Stadium at Georgia, and some of the other institutions at Kentucky, Florida, Purdue, and across the country. We also scale this down into high school applications. How you're able to control your lights should be as easy as talking to Alexa or pushing a button. We make that happen. We essentially put the controls of your facility and allow you different options for lighting your facility with LED, which helps you reduce your cost, which helps you reduce and can reduce if you're short on personnel, where you can schedule your lights out, where that you can control it. You can see it right here. You control it by this, literally by the touch of a button. Here we've done more than 24 high school installations throughout Ohio, including some of the schools that are listed here. I do want to allow you, or just kind of let you know, following the adoption of digital sports, we've really focused on designing a product that's cost effective for high schools to be able to adopt this. You may be looking at this and saying, oh, these things are out of my reach, it's too technological. That's not the case. We definitely have ways to be able to get you there and also be able to offer you solutions. One of the biggest things I can remember from high school is waiting 15 to 20 minutes to allow your lights to warm up. You don't have to wait for that now. They're instantly responsive. You can do celebrations literally at the push of a button when you get a touchdown. You can flood different colors, literally anything you can imagine with different colors. It was talked about earlier on this call about honoring folks at certain times. You can put red, white, and blue using colored lighting. That's used only 8 fixtures on that bottom center picture that you're looking at. And that's actually at the high school that coincidentally that I coach at currently. It's a fantastic tool. We've actually, candidly, we've used our high school stadium for our school dances for social distancing, and has actually given our high school facilities some additional flexibility and being able to stay within these mandates that we're all jumping through. It manages from state to state. I'm not going to get into it because it's a rabbit hole. Bottom line, when you're replacing an old system to here, it's a 60% energy saving, 60% energy savings year over year. You're going to eliminate having to get up to the top of the pole, replacing things, costly operational maintenance costs that you don't have to think about. Just to let you know, we do have a new installation and retrofit. So whether you want to keep your current infrastructure and just replace the lights and the controls, we can do that. If you have a brand new project, we can do that. We can walk you through exactly what it takes, how we can help you finance if you're part of a cooperative purchasing group, give you an immediate project proposal and let you know of what's going on, and then also cover you with a parts and labor warranty. What I would ask for you to do is, if you have a smartphone right now, or if you're taking notes, I would recommend you scanning this with your smartphone. This will give you Dan DeLand, who is our OHSAA rep. He's much more versed as far as taking everyone down the exact path they want to and understanding your needs from a sports lighting standpoint. My name is Ryan Demarest. I'm speaking on behalf of Ephesus Sports Lighting, on behalf of Dan DeLand. If you have any questions, I'm happy to hear and happy to answer those. Thank you very, very much for your time today, and we look forward to helping you with your sports lighting needs. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Appreciate you passing along that information. Extremely helpful. If you do have any questions, folks, feel free to reach out to Ryan or Dan, be able to give you a hand there. You're also more than welcome to place those questions into the chat as well, and we can send along that information as it's needed. Our next portion of the agenda was supposed to be the OHSAA. Unfortunately, we've had some technical difficulties, and Rick Giemond was not able to join us virtually through this morning. I will give you his contact information. It is his email is rgiemond, GUIMOND at Athens, ATHENSCSD.org. He is the president of the Ohio Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association. I will also show you their website as well, so that you do have that information, so that you can take a look at their services that they do provide. They are a great resource, especially for new athletic administrators throughout the state. So please give them a look. Please take some time to review their websites and consider joining their association. Again, you're more than welcome to reach out to Rick Giemond, who is the OIAA president and the Athens High School athletic administrator. But at this time, we will actually turn it over to Dr. Kimberly Keel, who is the Ohio High School Athletic Association Chief Operating Officer. She will give you some updates with regard to operations here with the association. Kim, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks so much, Ronald. I really appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. We're happy to have all of you here with us. I'm going to be pretty brief. I just want to give you a couple quick updates on operational kinds of things, mostly related to finance. I think all of you probably are aware by this time that we did institute member dues starting this year. Those dues are $50 per sanctioned sport that we have, but it does also mean that there'll be no tournament entry fees, no greens fees, no lanes fees for bowling, no weight management fees. So all of those things will be covered now under your membership, as well as we'll be continuing to pay the arbiter cost for you as well. Those invoices I anticipate will go out sometime in September. If you want to get something to us, you are welcome to go ahead and send a PO for your number of sports. We have maybe 5 or 6 schools who have already done that. You're welcome to do that if you want to get ahead of it. But we will send you an invoice with information about how to pay those dues, probably sometime mid to late September. Other things in terms of finance, Laura Vermilia, who's our controller, and I will do reviews of sports and finances at the end of every season. Usually it ends up being about middle of the following season, due to waiting for items to come in from the districts to be sure we have them. We are scheduling on September 14th in the morning our review of spring sports, as well as our year-end review. We'll go through our year-end budget. It will be an unaudited budget, but we will at least go through that with you and answer any questions you have. We had a very good spring, the best spring we've ever had, by the way, so that was good. And then after fall, we'll schedule something probably February or so, where we'll review the fall sports and then do the same thing for winter and spring again next year. We want to keep you updated. If you have any questions about finances or things around here having to do with the operations of daily operations of the Columbus office and the districts, I'm the person to reach out to, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions now, or feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call and we can chat then as well. But that's, I think, the brief update that I have for you this morning. Happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Thanks, Kim. Right now, we don't have any questions that have popped up, but I will forward you any that do come along via email, and we can also take those at the end if you're going to be sticking around. At this time, we will we'll pass it back over to Kristen Ronay, Director of Compliance with the association, where she'll give you some updates on referendum voting and then additional bylaw reminders. Kristen, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks so much, Ronald. And again, good morning, everyone. So as quick and brief as everybody else has been, I am going to change pace and you're going to hear me talk for a while. So hang in there. I have several issues that I want to make sure that I can cover with you guys. The first one, as Ronald mentioned, is the upcoming referendum vote, the upcoming emergency referendum vote, I should say. Email went out just yesterday regarding the how you're going to do that process. Ronald, I think you still might be sharing your screen, so make sure that you get out of that. No? Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and share mine, and we can kind of talk about this in a little bit more detail. So, with respect to the emergency referendum item, there was some language that was added to the state budget bill in the 2019 summer. And what that rule essentially said was that schools have to have the same pupil transfer rules, regardless of whether they're public or non-public. Now, on its face, that might seem like a good idea, but because of the enrollment options that non-public and public schools can have, there are some differences between these different schools. So in looking at this strikeouts here, what we had to do in 2019 was go through all of our bylaws and remove any exception or bylaw which did not apply equally to both a public or a non-public school. So we ended up moving exception 5 and exception 6 of the general transfer rule. In short, this exception 6 talks about a public school enrolling a student whose house is being built in the district or whose family is buying a house in the district. And obviously those same ORCs don't have any application to non-public schools, so that had to be removed. Likewise, if we scroll down here to bylaw 474, this is dealing with intra-district transfers, so students who are within the same district. Similarly, under exception 5, if they would transfer from a poor performing school to a non-poor performing school, they could have used this exception previously to restore their full athletic eligibility. But because of the fact that non-public schools do not receive grade cards from the Ohio Department of Education, there's no way a student could transfer from a non-public school and use this exception. So unfortunately, we did have to remove it, and it has not been in place for the past 2 years. Moving down here, under 475, again, this is transfer between schools of different districts where the former school was poor performing and they were transferring to a non-poor performing school. So again, unfortunately, had to remove that one. And then the last 2 changes which were made is under 476. We had to it's again transfers between schools of the same district. We had to remove the redistricting option because that was only applicable to public schools because non-public schools don't have defined districts or attendance areas. And under 477, which are transfers between schools of the same system, non-public schools, we had to remove these options, which are a material change in economic circumstances or a material change in transportation circumstances. So with that information in mind, let me see if I can get out of my screen sharing. So we had to remove all of those bylaws 2 years ago. Now, with the recent budget bill that was just passed this past summer, that language making all of our rules the same, that was removed. So now we are allowed to restore these particular rules, but there's no provision within the Constitution which allows the executive director's office or the board of directors to restore those on our own. Even though they were all previously voted in place by our member schools, we just don't have that authority. So what we are proposing and what the board has approved is an emergency referendum vote that's going to take place between September 1st, so starting tomorrow, and going until September 15th. During that period of time, your school principal will be able to go in and vote whether or not he or she is in favor of restoring those exceptions, whether they're opposed to restoring those exceptions, or whether they'd like to abstain from voting on that fact. So because of the fact that all of those exceptions were previously in place, we're very hopeful that they can be restored, and that will allow us to re-implement these exceptions for the remainder of the 21-22 school year. Within the email that was provided yesterday, we went into a lot of FAQs of why didn't we just wait until May, and why are we doing these all in one group? Again, the biggest thing, because they were in place previously, we think let's put them all up. If the membership wants to put them all back in, that's appropriate. If it does not pass, then we might select individually some of those exceptions to put on for a referendum vote in May. But for the time being, they're all in one group from September 1st to September 15th. Just some guidance that you might be able to assist your principals with. If we go here and into your school's My OHSAA account, so this is the dashboard. Your school principals would go to the schools icon and they would click on their respective school. And then tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., there's going to be a vote icon right there. So that's where your principals will go in. It's only a one issue topic. They can go in, vote one of those three ways. It should take them no longer than 5 minutes to complete that process. So we're really hopeful for a lot of involvement from our member school principals. And hopefully that was a clear enough explanation. So before I get into student eligibility issues, just wanting to check and make sure, Ronald, were there any questions that came in as I was speaking there?
We have not had any questions with regard to the referendum piece as of right now.
Okay, all right, thank you. If you do have questions, follow up later on with me. You can certainly put those in the chat at a later point in time. But what I'd like to do right now is to transition into some more important bylaw reminders. Now, I do know that there are some more experienced ADs who have elected to join this presentation as opposed to the focused new administrator workshop that our previous workshops were about. This is going to be the important reminders overview, but I am going to get a little bit more specific for some of our newer ADs with respect to some more basic student eligibility issues. So would encourage you to tune in at your leisure and listen to anything that you might feel is appropriate, but we are going to kind of get down to more of a basic level covering some of the student eligibility issues here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. The PowerPoint up. Okay, excellent. So first talking about some important bylaw reminders. Last May, actually it's 2 Mays ago now, we had the Constitution Article 619 that was voted in place by our member school principals. Basically what that allows the executive director's office to do is to waive the strict compliance of certain bylaws or Constitution articles if the non-compliance is a direct and proximate result of the COVID-19, I can't talk today, the COVID-19 pandemic. The biggest one, and probably the one that you've been impacted most by so far, is this second option here. We waived the scholarship bylaw during the entire 2021 school year, and we've also waived it for the first grading period of this current 21-22 school year. And the reason we were able to do that is because of that Constitution Article 619. So coming into this fall season, regarding a student's academic eligibility, every student was eligible unless your school elected to uphold your own standards. I do know there were several schools more than several, multiple schools around the state who elected to uphold that 5-credit standard just because of the fact that they were able to be in school for the final grading period of last school year. But in addition to the OHSAA standard for academics, there is also the Ohio Revised Code, which requires schools to set a minimum GPA standard. And so that would be in addition to the OHSAA standard. So just keep that in mind. I know a lot of school districts maybe have dropped that, but beginning with the second grading period of this current school year, we are going to re-implement the enforcement of that scholarship bylaw. So you need to make sure right now that all of your fall athletes and your winter athletes are scheduled for at least 5 1-credit courses or the equivalent at the high school level, or 4 classes at the junior high level or 7th and 8th grade level. It's really unfortunate when we have appeals when a student was not scheduled for enough courses, even if they ended up passing all of them, which renders them ineligible. So please make sure your students are currently scheduled for at least 5 courses or the 5 credits or the equivalent. The next thing I'll talk about is actually number 1 here, reusing the tournament divisions. So typically the OHSAA operates on a 2-year cycle using a school's EMIS number, and for competitive balance sports, adding any competitive balance factors that they might have. So those are typically done on a 2-year cycle for the EMIS. Last fall of October 2020, that traditionally would have been when the OHSAA would have collected schools' updated EMIS numbers, and then they would have been implemented new for this 21-22 school year. Back during the beginning of last school year, we considered basically 3 different options of how are we going to actually do this moving forward because of the mass exodus that our schools experience of students transferring to a different school because of mask mandates, or maybe transferring to an online school because their parents didn't feel comfortable with them being in an in-person setting. We just didn't feel as though an October count from 2020 was going to be an accurate representation of the students who would actually be walking the schools during the next 2 years. So the first option that we considered and which we ultimately ended up using is to reuse the 2020-21 tournament divisions for this coming school year. It's going to be a straight repeat, so there will be no shifting of schools into different divisions. Obviously, there's pros and cons to each presentation I'm going to provide to you. Obviously, the con in this case is it's going to be used for 3 years, so probably the EMIS is not an accurate representation of the students who are potentially walking your school buildings, but it's consistent across every single school. And we received a lot of inquiries of, well, we've lost 20 students because of COVID, and 20 students would have bumped us down. Under the old rules, yes, but we can't do it on a school by school basis, and you can guarantee that there's other schools who also lost students. So that was the option that was ultimately selected. Some of the other things we considered was using old EMIS data and new competitive balance roster data, or using old EMIS data that with no competitive balance added in. There were a lot of different conversations that were had, but ultimately it was decided we're going to straight reuse the 2020-21 tournament divisions for this upcoming school year. And then this upcoming October of 2021, we are going to be recollecting new EMIS data for application during the 22-23 school year. So a lot of information there, but what you need to know, all of your sports teams are in the same division that they were last year, and then those shifts will then be made beginning with the next school year. We've received a lot of questions regarding this number 3 here with respect to the semester bylaw. There were actually 2 bills within the General Assembly looking to potentially extend these students' semesters of eligibility, but because of the fact that the large majority of our member schools were able to have very successful sports seasons last year, unlike maybe our neighbors to Kentucky who weren't as lucky, and they actually did legislate that those students could come back for another year. But it was decided because of the unknown number of students who would try and take advantage of this, coupled with the fact that we did have sports seasons, we have elected to uphold this semester by law, and students only get 8 semesters taken in order of attendance, regardless of whether or not they participate at the high school level. And that same rule is applicable at the 7th and 8th grade level, but they only get 4 semesters. So unless it would be very late in the school year, I think, for a legislator to continue to push this forward. So unless you hear otherwise, you need to continue operating under those 4 and 8 semester rules. There was also no change made to the transfer bylaw. A couple of the reasons that we made that decision is, one, honestly, to protect our schools' funding. So any school, public or non-public, does rely on funding, whether that's from the State Department of Education or from a parent paying tuition. We did not want to waive this transfer bylaw and allow students to transfer to any school that they want, because that would really upset our schools' funding models and the expectations they might be able to have. So that was one of the reasons. Another one's, it would have been an impossible undertaking for our office to try and not be arbitrary in determining which transfers were for COVID reasons and which were for athletic reasons. It would have just been impossible to try and navigate those, and we did not feel we could do that in a fair manner. And then the last thing to keep in mind is that a student who does transfer to a new school, they're not completely excluded from participation. Yes, I am not naive to the fact that sitting out the second half of the season in the tournament is not a desirable situation for most students. But we did feel that based on the pros and cons of deciding to uphold this transfer bylaw or not, the fact that they did receive at least half of a season of participation kind of played into the fact that we are electing to uphold that transfer rule. So those are the kind of bylaw reminders just with respect to the Constitution, Article 619. What I'd like to do now is get into a little more specific student eligibility stuff. So if you are a more experienced school administrator, this might be one where you can open up your email and have my voice in the background. But for those of you who are new administrators, I'd really like you to focus in here, because student eligibility is very all-encompassing. And I put this picture here. I don't want you to feel like I'm fire hosing you with information right now, but there is a lot of different areas, 10 to be exact, that a student has to be eligible under in order to participate. So I'm going to go through each of these 10 sections and just outline different triggers that you might need to think of as you're determining whether or not a student is actually eligible to be competing on your sports teams. So the first thing I'll go over here is the eligibility certificate. So in accordance with bylaw 631, each school has to complete some sort of eligibility certificate for each team and keep that on file at the school. We have developed a form which can be found at OHSAA.org to help you to establish that eligibility certificate, but I do know a lot of schools use their own version, whether that be an automatic creation through Final Forms or through Arbiter Game. You just need to make sure that you are writing down the students who are eligible to compete on your sports teams. And as a new AD, I really like to say that this is a safeguard for you, because you fill this out, only write down the students who are eligible, and give it to your coach and say, these are the students you are allowed to play. Do not play anybody else aside from who is on this list. That way, if they do happen to play a student who is ineligible, and if regrettably you would have to forfeit that game, you've already done your due diligence as a school administrator, and you can express that either to your principal or superintendent, because as Doug expressed, a lot of times the sports programs are what the community sees. And if you would unfortunately have to be forced to forfeit a game, you just want to make sure that you as the athletic administrator did everything you can to prevent that from occurring. So filling out this eligibility certificate, although it's required by a bylaw, it's just a good safeguard for you to keep in place to make sure that students are eligible. So what's a couple of the things that the eligibility certificate is going to try and go over with you? And that's going to be the 10 different sections of the student eligibility. So under bylaw 4.2, when a high school student turns 20 years of age, they become ineligible for interscholastic athletics. And you'll get this trend as we go through these different areas. There is always an exception to the rule. And I'll preface that again, a codified exception, which has been voted upon by the member schools. The OHSAA office is not allowed to make our own exception. We can only determine if the requirements of one of the member schools' approved exceptions have been met. And in the case of the age bylaw, there is an exception for a child with a disability who might not impact the outcome of any contest, that they could keep playing past their 20th birthday. Likewise, for a student who turns 15 before August 1st of the school year in which he or she desires to participate, there are two exceptions for this rule: a student with a disability or a student who was retained in grades K through 3. But similarly to the high school exception, those will only be approved if the student would not impact the outcome of a contest or participate in a meaningful way. There are more rules of compassion, as one judge so eloquently put it in one of his rulings. So just keep those two rules in mind: 20 at high school, 15 before August 1st at the 7th and 8th grade level. Now, this last bullet point here, if a student in 7th or 8th grade does turn 15 prior to August 1st, they are allowed to play sports at the high school level. So you could theoretically have an 8th grade student playing for your high school team. But it's a very important distinction that the family will need to make. If they elect to play at the high school level as an 8th grader, they will have used a semester of high school athletic eligibility. So that might render them ineligible for their senior year unless an exception can be met to the semester bylaw. So deciding whether or not you want to allow a 15-year-old to play for your high school team is something that really needs to be considered. Enrollment and attendance. As the title suggests, there's two different sections here. The first one we're going to talk about is the attendance, actually. So establishing eligibility as a 9th grader. A student is only permitted 8 semesters of athletic eligibility, as I mentioned before, regardless of whether or not they play, and taken in order of attendance. Again, there are exceptions to that rule, and after a student completes the 6th grade, but before entering 9th grade, they're only allowed 4 semesters of eligibility. I would say this fall particularly, we have received more semester requests than the history of any other fall sports season with my time with the association. I think with COVID last year, there were just a lot of families who made the personal decision to hold their child back, which was certainly within their prerogative. But as I mentioned earlier, we still are electing to uphold those semester bylaws. So currently, these 8 semesters and 4 semesters are in place unless the student would meet the requirements of one of the exceptions to this rule. The second part of the enrollment and attendance bylaw, where are students allowed to play? So it's outlined in bylaw 431, and it basically says you have to play sports where you go to school. Now, there's been lots of legislative intervention and different rules that are created, which have caused some confusion around that rule. But the purpose of it, obviously, it promotes school loyalty, establish a cohesive student body. You want to support the kids who you're going to school with. And in some cases, students are allowed to earn physical education credit based on their participation on their school sports team. So that's why that rule is in place. And what you need to start with in determining eligibility for this particular bylaw is, does the student attend your school? If the student attends your school, they're allowed to participate on your sports teams, assuming they're eligible in all other respects, meaning that age bylaw, that semester bylaw, transfer, which we'll get to, etc. If they do not attend your school, then you have to ask, does the student meet the requirements of one of the exceptions to bylaw 431. Now, there are 7 exceptions to that particular rule. The most common one that we deal with is in accordance with state law, as I mentioned, that legislative intervention. And it does allow, in this highlighted part, for home educated students or students who attend a non-public school, a community school, or a STEM school that does not offer a particular sport, okay? Those students are allowed to participate in sports at the public high school located in their parents' residential district, or if the parent lives in a multi-high school district, at the school closest to the parent's residence. Again, I'm going to say that again. So if a student happens to be homeschooled, or if they attend a non-public school, a community school, or a STEM school that does not offer a sport, they can play that sport at their local residential public school. Okay, there are a couple exceptions to that rule. I'm not going to get into that much detail at this point in time, but something you'll notice here is I did not say that a student attends a public school that might not offer a sport can go somewhere else to play that sport. Okay, we are currently looking at that rule this current school year to potentially bring it forward to our schools through a referendum vote of how do we want to extend those participation opportunities for students who are attending a public school. And that's a typo there on that last bullet point. I apologize. That should say public school. Because right now I went to Warsaw Riverview High School and that's where I graduated from. But that school doesn't offer tennis. So if I wanted to go over to a different school to play tennis, right now there would be no exception for me to be able to do that. There are some workarounds for that rule for individual sports. And I'm going to give this kind of an inside hint here. If you are a public school that doesn't offer the sport of, say, swimming, you could actually hire the coach of a different school to train your athletes. You could work with that school to figure out the logistics of who's doing the scheduling, who's doing the payment of the coach, that sort of thing. And the athlete could train with the other school's team, but they would still have to represent your school in any competition that they would enter. It's a very common arrangement in sports like cross country, gymnastics, swimming and diving. But again, those students aren't going to play for a different school. You are just hiring the coach at a different school, and the student is still representing your school in all competitions. The thing to keep in mind, however, for this school year, as Dr. Keel mentioned earlier, there is a $50 fee now for any sport that your school sponsors. So if you decide to do that option, you'll have to make that decision. Are we as the school going to foot that $50 bill, or are we going to pass that along to the parents since we technically wouldn't be offering the sport, aside from the fact that we're wanting to give this particular student a participation opportunity. So different things to keep in mind there, but bylaw 431, you have to play sports where you go to school. There's 7 exceptions to that rule, and the most common one is in accordance with state law and cover those 4 particular classifications of students. The last thing I'll talk about with enrollment and attendance is where does a student play if they happen to live in a multi-high school district. So if you have a single high school district, you don't need to worry about this flow chart. But if you do live in a multi-high school district, let's follow this red flow here. So you start, does the student's parents live within the multi-high school district? The answer is yes. What type of school do they attend? We're actually going to go to the blue one here. Let's say they're home educated. If they're home educated, you go to this blue flow. Has the student been homeschooled or attended this school since the start of 9th grade? We'll say yes, they have been homeschooled since the start of 9th grade. So we end at students' eligibility for athletics shall be vested at the high school closest to the parents' residence. So basically these kids play at the school closest to where they live. Again, this is only applicable if a student lives in a multi-high school district and is permitted a participation opportunity as a non-enrolled student. So I've been talking here for a little bit of time. I'm going to pause for a moment and ask Ronald if there were maybe any questions that came in. I don't want to get too far removed from these particular bylaws.
Thanks for checking. But we do not have any questions, actually, so you're knocking it out of the park in terms of clarity. So.
Okay, clarity, or people are just being shy, one or the other. So hopefully it's the former. Moving on then to the rest of the student eligibility issues. As I mentioned, we have a scholarship bylaw. It's found in bylaw 4.4. And when a student enters 7th grade, they're eligible regardless of their past academic performance. They get a fresh start going into 7th grade. In 7th and 8th grade, they have to pass a minimum of 4 classes. Okay, so it could be gym, math, science, and home ec. It doesn't matter what type of 4 classes they are, they just have to be passing 4. That same rule applies going into 9th grade. They have to pass a minimum of 4 classes, but entering the 2nd grading period of their 9th grade year, that's when the high school bylaw becomes effective. And when you're in high school, you have to pass a minimum of 5 1-credit courses or the equivalent. And you always look at the immediately preceding grading period. So as I discussed earlier, a student's eligibility for the 2nd grading period is going to be based on the work that they completed at the end of the 1st grading period. So think of it as a snapshot. At the end of the 1st grading period, which students pass 5 1-credit courses or the equivalent, and that's how you determine eligibility for the 2nd grading period. During our in-person presentations, we really went over a lot of examples of how to determine equivalency. And if you have questions about that, please feel free to reach out to either myself or Ronald. Basically, if, say, a student takes a course for only a semester, then the student actually gets double the amount of credits when looking at athletic eligibility. So it would be really easy if every student took 5 classes and they were all worth 1 credit, but that doesn't happen at the high school level. So reach out to me and I'd be happy to walk you through those equivalencies, how to practice those. A couple things otherwise to keep in mind with the scholarship bylaw is that summer school is not allowed to be used to bring a student in compliance with the scholarship bylaw. So if a student at the end of your school's last grading period, they only passed 4 classes, but they decided to do some summer school to make up that work and then pass the class, that grade can be used for their diploma, but it cannot be used to determine their athletic eligibility. So keep in mind, again, you think of it's a snapshot of the student's work at the end of the immediately preceding grading period. So summer school can never be used to bring a student in compliance. Conversely, CCP courses and credit recovery courses actually completed during the grading period in question do count towards graduation and can count towards athletic eligibility. So if a student is involved in a credit recovery course completed during the 1st grading period, you are allowed to use that class for athletic eligibility. And just a point of clarification here, CCP courses taking over the summer do not count towards athletic eligibility. They can only count if the student engages in that coursework during the grading period in question. Okay, and the last thing under scholarship is the eligibility or ineligibility of student continues until the start of the 5th school day of the next grading period, at which time the grades from the immediately preceding grading period become effective. So think of it this way. If your 3rd grading period ends on a Friday, a student is not going to be able to become eligible on that Monday because there's no way the teachers can get those grades in that you can verify that eligibility. So it's the start of the 5th school day that you need to wait for a student's eligibility or ineligibility to become effective. Now there is an exception for that rule. If a student is ineligible but completed the work and has the opportunity to become eligible, they are actually allowed to do that on the 5th calendar day, but reach out to me if you have one of those students and I can explain that in a little bit more detail. But the general rule is the eligibility or ineligibility changes at the start of the 5th school day of the next grading period. Moving on to residency then. This is one that is not a big issue in some areas of our state, but even in maybe say central Ohio areas, if a student is living with their aunt and their parent lives in Ohio, that student is currently ineligible under the residency bylaw. So this rule says that if a student's parents or legal guardian live outside of Ohio, then they're ineligible for any interscholastic athletics at one of our member schools. This is the bylaw that has the most exceptions. It has 12 of them. And the most common one is when a family gives custody or guardianship to a primary relative. So that would be an aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa, or sibling. Say the parent lives in Kentucky, gives custody to the sibling who lives in Southern Ohio. That student would meet the requirements of this residency exception, so they could potentially play for the first half of the season, but an approval under residency does not necessarily waive the transfer consequence. So the student could still have to sit out the second half of the season if they don't meet a transfer exception. So that's residency. Again, on that eligibility certificate that you complete, make sure that all of your students have a parent living in Ohio, and that even goes for a student who maybe has been in your school since kindergarten, but is living with their grandparents. That student most likely will be approved under that exception that I referenced, but a ruling is still needed. So make sure that they have a parent living in Ohio. Moving on to transfer. So aside from the enrollment and attendance bylaw, transfer is by far the one we get the most inquiries on of what do we do in this situation, how does it apply, etc. So the first thing to keep in mind is that the transfer bylaw only applies to students in grades 9 through 12. This is the only rule under this 10-section student eligibility group that does not apply to 7th and 8th graders. So 7th and 8th graders can transfer back and forth between schools at any time, and there is no consequence. But once they pick their high school to establish their initial eligibility, either by attending school there for 5 days or playing in a contest before the sports season, before the school year starts, any change in their enrollment is going to invoke the transfer consequence, okay? And the transfer consequence means if a student played a sport at the high school level in the 12 months prior to their transfer, they are required to sit out the second half of the maximum allowable regular season contest of that sport and the tournament unless an exception can be met, okay? So anytime you have a transfer student, always think they have to sit out the second half and the tournament unless I can get them approved under exception. But again, keep in mind, it only applies to those sports in which they previously played. So if a student played football at the first school, transferred to a different school, and now wants to try out for basketball, there's no transfer consequence in the sport of basketball because they didn't play that sport. Some of the common exceptions which families use to waive this transfer consequence is the bona fide move exception. So when a family makes a move from one school district into a new school district, and that move compels them to transfer to a new school. That is far and away the most commonly used exception we have. We usually process between 850 and 1,000 of those each school year. Another common one is the change of custody exception. So it's similar to the bona fide move, but it's only the student who moves in that instance. So if you have dad who lives in school district A, mom who lives in school district B, if they do a change of custody from dad to mom, or if they redesignate their residential parent within their shared parenting plan, that student could be approved for full eligibility after the application request comes into our office. And the change of custody exception is exception 2. The other one, which is very common, is the one-time transfer into the district of residence where the parents have lived for at least 1 year. That is exception 9. So can apply to a student regardless of whether they're attending maybe a public school open enrolled elsewhere, or whether they're attending a non-public school that they maybe can't afford anymore, every student is entitled to a one-time transfer back into the district of residence where their parents have lived for at least 1 year. So a pretty common exception as well. We probably process between 400 and 500 of those each school year. The last one I have written down here is bullying, and you'll notice I put it request in parentheses there because I would not say it is a common one to be approved, but the requests come in like you wouldn't believe. That I was bullied by this girl at school because she doesn't like me, or I was bullied by this coach, or just, I mean, a variety of issues. And I'm not saying that to belittle because there are certainly cases where a bullying transfer request is very warranted, and that student needs to remove themselves from that situation. But the biggest thing to keep in mind with bullying exceptions is the documentation, that if there's not contemporaneously reported allegations of these bullying requests with action occurring as a disciplinary procedure for the offending student, it's most likely not going to be approved. It's not intended to get out of a situation that you just don't like anymore. There needs to be documented evidence of bullying, and we follow kind of in line with the Ohio Revised Code of what constitutes bullying when considering those approvals. So just wanted to bring that one to your attention. I'm hopeful you don't have to process a lot of those because, like I said, lots of documentation required, but it is available if a family would like to request it. The last thing I'll mention on this slide, mid-season transfers. So this is covered under bylaw 473, and it basically says a student cannot play the same sport during the same sports season at different schools. So if I played in a volleyball game at my first school and I transferred to a different school in the middle of the season, I'm most likely not going to be able to resume participation in that sport. There are, and the point I'll clarify for this too, this rule is only invoked if the student plays in a regular season contest. So if a student maybe only scrimmages at the former school, they could transfer to a new school and play for the first half of the season, potentially play for the second half of the season, depending on whether or not they can meet a transfer exception. But 473 is only applied if they play in a regular season game. Now, there are two exceptions to that rule. If a family moves and the schools are more than 50 miles apart, or if a student experiences a change of custody as a result of the intervention of children's services and the schools are at least 50 miles apart. In those cases, we can approve a student to resume participation in that sport. But again, only if one of those two scenarios apply and if the schools are at least 50 miles apart. We obviously don't want a student playing for one school on a Friday night and the next school playing at their neighboring school district the next Friday night. So the 50 miles is really important there. You'll notice here the last thing before I move on with respect to what constitutes the transfer consequence. And it's really important to note that it's all based on the number of maximum allowable regular season games. So if you see this chart, let's go to cross country. You can see here it says games, it should probably say meets, but that there are allowed 16 meets in the sport of cross country. So playing in the first 50% means they get to play in the first 8 and that they would become ineligible for meet number 9. But keep in mind, sorry guys, wanted to put that in there. Even if your school only schedules, say, 10 track and field meets or 10 cross country meets, the student who is subject to the transfer consequence is still allowed to play in the first 8. Okay, it's not based on your actual schedule of how many you have scheduled. It's all based on the maximum allowable. So that really helps those students who might not meet a transfer exception to be able to have a greater participation opportunity in those sort of sports. Similar in baseball and softball with a lot of rainouts, even if you only end up playing 20 games, the transfer student can still participate in the first 14 games. Okay, I'll go back a slide here. who is generally the first person to know if a student is a transfer? A lot of times it's your coaches. So please make sure that you're telling your coaches, hey, if you have a new kid who tried out for your team this year that you don't recognize, please let me know as the athletic administrator. I'm hopeful a lot of your schools have maybe different notification processes that a family will need to go through when they go through the enrollment, but I realize sometimes that doesn't always happen. So at least make sure that your coaches have a general knowledge of the fact that they might have a transfer student. That way that you can get involved to rule on their athletic eligibility moving forward. Okay, that's this one. The last three sections of student eligibility, which I'm going to cover here, are the international and exchange student bylaws. So if a student is not a United States citizen, and you can check that by checking their birth certificate, that's one of the ways you can, they have to be living here with a parent to be eligible. If they're not living here with a parent, then they have to meet an exception. Okay, the most common exception that we have for international students is aptly named Exception 1, and it's for students who are here for 2 semesters, so 1 school year, and they're here on a J1 visa. Those students are granted athletic eligibility at your school. We do check to make sure that they haven't graduated yet, that they haven't exceeded their 8 semesters of participation, that they're age appropriate, etc. But the thing to keep in mind, if a student is not a US citizen, they either need to be living here with a parent or they need to get a ruling under an exception. If they are living here with a parent, then you do not need a ruling from our office. So that's international exchange students. Under the recruiting bylaw, so this past spring, I conducted 3 different recruiting seminars, which took between an hour and a half to 2 hours. So it is definitely a topic that has lots of points that I could cover, but I'm not going to do that today. I'm just going to give you the basic idea of a prospective student athlete who is covered under the recruiting bylaw is any student in grades 7 through 12. Okay, sometimes we get allegations of this high school coach was at my 3rd grader's soccer game. That is not a violation of our recruiting bylaw. We only go down to the 7th grade. The term recruit, it's pretty broad. It is the use of influence by any person connected or not connected with the school. That would include the students attending your school, trying to secure the enrollment of a prospective student athlete for athletic purposes. If a student is recruited, there is a potential that they could be declared ineligible, and the school could potentially have sanctions against it as well if they were the ones who violated that recruiting bylaw. Not common, but I would say one that you need to be aware of is there's a provision that if a coach leaves a school and gets hired at a new school, that any student who follows that coach is automatically ineligible for a year unless the presumption of recruiting can be rebutted, is the term that we use, that disproven, that if a student does follow a coach, the family can submit a narrative letter explaining why they made that decision and any information which would support the fact that the coach did not recruit their student athlete. So just different recruiting things to keep in mind. I would encourage you, if you have questions about any sort of situation, to reach out to me. Again, I can't get into all the specific details of the recruiting bylaw and what is and is not permitted just because of the lack of time we have today. But just to make sure that you're keeping cognizant of the fact that your coaches especially cannot be attempting to secure the enrollment of any prospective student athlete not currently enrolled in your school. The last thing I'll mention before I move on here is that there are exceptions to that rule for students who attend a 7th and 8th grade school who would feed directly into a public high school. So if you are a single high school district and you have a single junior high, everybody comes to your high school, that you would be allowed to have contact with those students in grades 7 and 8. There's a comparable type of rule for non-public schools who potentially have defined attendance zones, which the only one in the state currently who has that is the Columbus Diocese. So again, reach out to me with questions on any sort of recruiting issues that you have moving forward. The last part of the student eligibility bylaw is the amateurism section. So a student does have to be eligible under this bylaw. There was recent intervention, as you likely know, regarding the name, image, and likeness rule, but that only impacts college athletes at this point in time. I'll be transparent with you that we're currently undergoing kind of an audit of this particular bylaw to potentially put up some of these amateurism rules for a membership vote in May to try and change them because of just the changing nature of the amateurism world that we live in. But currently, a student is allowed to receive an award valued at $400 of less based on their participation in a sport, but a cash award can never be accepted. So it's common in the sport of golf, if a student enters an event that might have a prize where you would win a jacket or maybe a golf bag or something like that, as long as it's valued under $400, a student could receive that prize and not be in violation of the amateurism bylaw. And there is also a form for a student if he wishes to participate in an event where a cash prize is available, or if they go to an event where there's travel, meal, or lodging reimbursements provided. Again, they have to agree that they won't accept the cash prize, but at least they could enter into that event as long as they fill out that request for retention of amateur status form prior to participating. And the last thing that I'm going to go over with you guys here are not student eligibility rules, but just changes to our out-of-state bylaw or out-of-state participation bylaws that you would need to be aware of. So under bylaw 921, when you travel to a non-bordering state, it does now require approval from the OHSAA office. So for some of you new athletic administrators who maybe schedules were already developed before you got there, check to make sure that if you have traveled to a non-bordering state contest, that you would need to submit a form now to our office. And those forms can be found on each respective sports page. It's just travel to a non-bordering state form. Very common in sports like baseball and softball for your summer break trips, even basketball, maybe traveling somewhere warm during the cold winter season. So just keep that in mind. Emily Gates and Tyler Brooks might talk about that in our next section coming up. But the last thing that I'll talk about is sanctioning, and that's covered under bylaw 923. What that means is if you are participating in an event which meets any of these 4 following criteria at the bottom of this page, you're obligated to ensure it's been sanctioned by the NFHS. Now, what a sanction means is basically that the officials are qualified and that the funds are going to go to an appropriate place, that a school is not going to charge $40 for a parent to get into this sort of game. Basically just ensuring that it's run in the spirit of what we want education-based athletics to be. So the 4 examples or the 4 situations which do require approval from the NFHS for a sanction are any event which includes an Ohio and an out-of-state school which is co-sponsored or titled in the name of an organization outside the school community. So say we have an Ohio school and a Texas school and Nike wants to sponsor this event, or ESPN wants to sponsor the event, which has been getting a lot of traction about a non-member school here in Ohio recently. But if an Ohio member school were to have played in that event sponsored by ESPN with an out-of-state school, that event would have need to have obtained a sanction from the NFHS. Under B here, events involving non-bordering states where 5 or more states are involved. So this could be if you had Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, West Virginia, and California. So those are 5 states and one of them is non-bordering in California. So that event would need to be sanctioned by the NFHS. The third event, events involving non-bordering states if more than 8 schools are involved. And the last one, schools from a foreign country with the exception of Canada or Mexico. That's not nearly as common. But with respect to the sanctioning, You as the school do not need to worry about requesting the sanction from the NFHS. If you go to this bylaw 923, there's actually a link that you can go to determine whether or not the event has been sanctioned and whether or not you're allowed to play in it. So if you have contests which have any of these sort of situations involved, please feel free to reach out to me, because it is a relatively new process as a result of our referendum vote this past May. So here to help with that. Parting thoughts on student eligibility. Okay, so I just threw a lot at you. I told you I was going to fire hose you, but the OHSAA is created to serve each and every of our member schools as equally as we can. Sometimes there's really complicated questions with respect to transfer and the recruiting bylaw. We're going to try our best to get you a timely answer and a consistent answer, and we're going to deliver it to you with as much clarity, consistency, and compassion that we can. That's our motto and our goal here within the compliance department at the OHSAA. So please always feel free to reach out to us. And just the last thing to keep in mind is that we can only address items that are actually presented to our office. So if you are mad about your neighboring school recruiting your kids, at least bring it to our attention. Okay, obviously to start a recruiting investigation, we try and get some tangible things to work with, but we're an open door and we want you to reach out to us with any questions or concerns that you might have. So that's all for my portion of the presentation. You all can see my email and my direct line there, 614-549-6972. That's my direct line at the office, and you're welcome to reach out to me. So at this time, I'll ask Ronald if there were any sort of questions that came in during that particular presentation.
Yeah, thanks for checking, Kristen. We do have two questions that popped up. The first asks if 7th and 8th graders can play on the same teams.
That's a great question. Emily and Tyler will probably address that a little bit more, but the answer is yes. So we consider 7th and 8th grade students to be one entity, and 9th through 12th grade students to be one entity. So even if a student is a senior, maybe a foreign exchange student who's never played the sport of volleyball before, you would be able to stick that student on your quote unquote freshman team, because those are just labels that your schools put on either 7th or 8th grade, maybe freshman, JV, varsity, that any 7th and 8th grade student could play. You could bring 7th graders up to play on your 8th grade team, or 8th graders down to play on your 7th grade team. I would just be a little transparent with your opponents on which students are playing on sports teams. But along those same lines, however, I know some schools around the state are 6th through 8th grade. 6th graders are not allowed to play on 7th and 8th grade teams. So you will need to keep those students separate if you run into those sort of situations. Thanks, Ron. What's the next one?
Yep. So one other, they ask, and there's an anonymous question, which is perfectly fine, but they ask, they have a student athlete that is now open enrolled into the school district. That athlete participated in football last school year, and they ask, is the student athlete ineligible after game 5 of the regular season, or is there an exception that applies to this situation?
Yeah, really good question. So most of the time, any student who open enrolls to a school is not going to meet a transfer exception. There's a few limited scenarios like the bullying exception, or if a school maybe discontinues their entire sports program, but generally, if a student lives outside your district, and the way it sounds here, the student is just open enrolling to your school, there's likely no exception that they are going to be able to meet. So that student will have to start sitting out after your varsity team has completed their 5th regular season game. So they'll have to start sitting out with game number 6. So really good question there. Anything else, Ron?
Nope, that's all we have for now.
Okay, excellent. Well, again, I thank you all so much for, I know I threw a lot at you there, but I'm really grateful for your participation today. So at this point in time, I'll turn it over, I think, to Tyler Brooks. He is our senior, one of our senior sport management directors, and Tyler can take it away with some sports management issues for you.
Thank you, Kristen and Ron. Hello, everybody. This is Tyler Brooks. I'm the Senior Manager of Officiating and Sport Administration here at the Ohio High School Athletic Association. And I'm joined by Emily Gates, and I'll hand it off to her in just a second. I'm going to share my screen and do a full screen presentation. Ron or Kristen, if this doesn't look right, just holler, because I believe when I go to presentation mode, it will kind of blot out both of my monitors, so I won't be able to see the Teams interface. So just holler if anything looks out of place.
And good morning. My name is Emily Gates. I am a senior sport administrator, and on our sport management team, it's both Tyler and I, and then John Cusio, Kate Barnett, and Bo Rugg. So I work with the sports of baseball, volleyball, field hockey, and bowling. And so several of us have different sport administration assignments. I've been here since 2014, and John and Kate are newer sport administrators. So feel free to reach out to us with any of the questions, especially after this presentation. And we're only going to cover just a few brief items, mainly things that we deal with the most in our department. So obviously you'll learn looking through the handbook and that kind of thing on our website that there's a lot more to sport management, but we wanted to just cover a few bases.
Again, my name is Tyler. I'll be chiming in occasionally throughout this presentation as well. I administer the sports of boys and girls golf, wrestling, and boys and girls lacrosse. I've also been here since 2014, and in addition to my sport administration duties, I have some duties in the officiating department, acting as the coordinator for our directors of officiating development in each sport, as well as all of the OHSAA assigners for your leagues and conferences as well. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Emily, and we'll give a little overview of some of the resources we'll be discussing, and hopefully help these terms come to life a little bit by the end of our presentation.
So what our sport management department works with mostly is the general sport regulations. So you should have all received a copy of the 2021-22 handbook in the mail. So you can have a physical copy, but we also have one that's a great source and tool for everybody, including us. We use it just about every day. We have an OHSAA handbook online. Why this is great is we don't expect you to be able to find the topic you need right away in a 200-page manual, but that's why the online tool is a great resource, because we use the Control F function to find whatever we're looking for. So that is a great tool on our website. We also have coaches manuals for all of our sports. So this really encompasses just about everything that we handle with the sport. It covers NFHS rule changes, points of emphasis for the season, any stated options that we may have to the NFHS rules. And then it also goes into the general sport regulations and the sport specific regulations a bit further. So if you are familiar with our handbook, there's the general sport regulations section, and then it kind of divides down further into each sport has its own specific set of regulations. So this is really important to note, as it details kind of the finer details of every sport. So it's things like the season start and end dates, when the tournaments are occurring, your maximum amount of contests, that kind of thing, or if there are any administrative rules to a sport. So for example, for the sport of baseball, we have the Ohio pitch count rule. So that's located in our sport regulations. So the coaches manuals in all of our sports go into a little further detail, a bit more simple summary, if you will, than kind of the sport regulations are listed as. So that's a great tool to note. And also another great tool is at the end of every sport regulations section, we have a list of future dates about 3 years out. So as administrators and coaches, I just think this is really beneficial for you all to know. If you want to start looking ahead to future years for scheduling, you guys may even get questions from parents of, people that want to plan vacation and that kind of thing. So we have the future sport dates about 3 years out. Another very beneficial resource is for your coaches. All of our sport administrators send coaches memos throughout the year in all of our sports. So it's typically dependent on the time of the year. For example, for fall sports, we typically send, end of season, early summer type of memos. A lot of the content also comes from if I'm, as a sport administrator, getting a lot of questions on a specific topic, or if there's something new that came from the NFHS. This is a great place that we house the information in these coaches memos. Some sport administrators send them to coaches and athletic directors. However, we are trying to be aware that your inboxes are very full and understand you probably don't need every single coach's memo on top of the administrator updates that already come from our office. So just so you are aware, especially if there's content that is specific to the coaches, but also the school administrator, we'll make sure to copy the administrator on those memos. But also, just so you are aware, we archive all of our coaches' memos on each sport web page. So if you go to the sport web page, sure.
Might go to the web page.
So if you go to each sport web page, it'll be the coaches memo section, and you'll see that they are archived from previous years, and then that's where we put every updated memo that we send out as well. So also on each sport webpage, this is where you'll find just about everything. So it'll show the manual, the regulations, the memos that I was mentioning, and then also around tournament time, this is where you'll navigate to the tournament information page. So it'll house our tournament regulations and also where you will find the brackets for that sport or any forms that you need to fill out to participate in the tournament. That's just every sport webpage is very, very helpful. You'll also see at the top of the page, every sport webpage has a calendar. So if you're just trying to quickly look for when does the sectional tournament start for volleyball, that's just a quick one-stop shop to find really just about anything that you'll need for the sport. So also another great resource for your coaches especially is all of our sports have coaches associations. So some are larger, some are smaller, but the coaches associations are extremely beneficial to be a member of because they really serve as the voice of coaches in the state of Ohio. We work closely, all of the sport administrators work closely with the presidents of our coaches associations, but they also have district representatives across the state. So if there are specific questions or topics of concern that are going on in certain areas of the state, they can always bring them to our attention. And this is where, too, we can receive proposals from coaches associations to make modifications or updates to the sport regulations. So just a quick example, in the state of Ohio, we used to have a volleyball sport-specific regulation that for grades 7 and 8, we had a lower net height than the high school net height. We started talking with the coaches associations across the state of Ohio and realized we weren't on par with the rest of the nation. The rest of the nation more or less was playing at their junior highs at a high school net height. So that's just an example of a proposal that came from the Coaches Association, and we made that change to have the junior high net height be at the high school net height.
And just real quickly to jump back onto OHSAA.org, in addition to each sports webpage, which you briefly saw just a few minutes ago, the entire OHSAA handbook, again, that you should have received a physical copy of with the red cover this year, is available online under the school resources page. This link right here, 2122 OHSAA handbook. It is available in full text. Again, I highly recommend using the Control F function. If you've looked something up before, quarter limitation, any phrase that you've read before, but you just have a hard time locating, I highly recommend using the Control F function to help navigate this document easier. But again, just to review what all information is in your handbook, it starts with the Constitution, and you'll see the tabs here on the left side, both on the physical copy and on the virtual or digital copy rather, followed by bylaws, which Kristen touched on some of them just a little bit ago. And then below the bylaws are the general sport regulations. We'll be touching on some of the more popular topics within general sport regulations here momentarily, but this is where you'll find a lot of information, especially in regards to out of season regulations. What can my players do on a non-school team? What can my coach do in the out of season? That's where you'll find a lot of the information in the general sport regulations. Then following the GSRs are the sport by sport regulations, and they're listed alphabetically, starting with baseball down to basketball, all the way through to wrestling and volleyball at the end. So you've got your digital copy here. It is a PDF, and you can search the text as needed.
So one bylaw that I wanted to mention before I go into some of the general sport regulations that we deal with is I just wanted to cover what our office defines as a member of a school team. So we consider that a student is not a member of an interscholastic squad until the student participates in its first preview, scrimmage, or contest for the school. So why I mentioned that is especially, earlier this month, we get a lot of questions about, they started practicing with us, but they want to continue participating in a camp that would typically not be permitted once they become a member of the school team. But since they hadn't participated in, say, a scrimmage or a contest yet, by our regulations, they would not yet be considered a member of the school team until they participate in one of these events. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. So the sport regulation our office deals, or our department deals with most, and that you will probably continue to get all kinds of questions about from student athletes and parents, is what can be done inside and outside of the season. So this is General Sport Regulation 7. We refer to it as the non-interscholastic rule. So kind of a quick summary is that student athletes cannot work out, try out, practice, or play really any type of physical interaction for the sport with any outside team or program. So it's as organized as, say, an AAU basketball team or a Legion baseball team, to as unorganized as just a church league volleyball league, something like that. This also includes participation in practices, tryouts, or workouts for colleges and universities, and no participation in any showcases. So basically during the season, they really can't participate in any type of non-school program. The maximum penalty for violating this regulation is becoming ineligible for the remainder of the season. We typically receive, we work with the schools if there is a violation on what penalty to apply. Sometimes it might be as minimal as just suspension from the following 2 contests, but again, the maximum penalty is an eligibility for the rest of the season. So one component to Sport Regulation 7 is Sport Regulation 7.3. So this details anytime outside of the season what a student athlete is permitted to participate in. So anytime outside of the school season, they are limited to, there is what we call the 50% limitation. So if you look on the screen, this is a screenshot from our handbook. So you'll see that the 50% limitation for every sport is different. So where we come up with this, I'll stick with volleyball just because it's the easiest one. So in the sport of volleyball, at one time, the number of players on a court is 6. So 50% of 6 players on the court is 3. So what this means is any time outside of the school season, there's a limitation of 3 players from the same school that may participate together on any non-school team or program. So for the sport of basketball, there's 5 players on a court at a time. Obviously, you can't have a half of a player, so the 50% limitation for basketball is 2. So anytime outside of the school season, there can only be 2 players on the same non-school team in the sport of basketball. So we have a few exceptions. So during the months of June and July, from June 1st to July 31st, the 50% limitation is not in effect. So keep in mind also that this time period starts a little earlier for the sports of baseball, lacrosse, and softball. This is not in effect from the end of their school season through July 31st. But during this time, there can be an unlimited amount of players from the same school team on the same non-school team. A few other exceptions. Graduating seniors are not counted, and if they did not play for the school team last season, they are not counted in that 50% limitation either. So I'll just give another volleyball example. So say you have 3 volleyball players that played for the school team that want to play together on the same JO volleyball team after this season. So the team starts at the end of November. Those 3 can play together because it does not exceed the 50% limitation. However, if you have 4 that come to you that played on the school team, that would not be permitted. They are only limited to 3. Now, say you have 5 that come to you asking to play on the same JO volleyball team. 3 or 4 played for the school team. However, one of those 4 is a graduating senior, and then the 5th player went to your school but did not play on the school team. You could have all 5 of those participate together because that 4th and 5th player, they meet an exception. So another quick point to note, Kristen mentioned this earlier, but we do consider grades 7 and 8 separate from grades 9 through 12. So say you have, there's 3 8th graders that want to participate on the same JO volleyball team and 3 9th graders that want to participate on the same JO volleyball team, and they're all from your same school district or your same school. This would be permitted because we consider them separate. And also keep in mind that they are grouped grades 9 through 12. It's not by the specific squad. So for example, there cannot be, we'll stick with volleyball again, there could not be 3 freshmen and 3 sophomores from the same school on the same non-school team. So coaching outside of the season is also covered in General Sport Regulation 7. School coaches are permitted to coach really any non-school team if they want to during the season. That's totally up to them if they can find time to do that. During this time, they wouldn't be able to have players from their own school team, but that would be permitted. But anytime outside of the school season, with a few exceptions, school coaches may coach their own players on a non-school team. So the only time that this would not be permitted is each sport has what we call a no contact period. So for most of our sports, this occurs 28 days after the season ends. So the day that the season ends and say they're out of the tournament, for the following 28 days, there can be no contact from the coach to the student athletes. Mainly physical activity or coaching or instruction cannot occur during this time. During this time, they are able to kind of verbally communicate, email back and forth, that kind of thing, or if there are awards ceremonies that can occur. And then for spring sports, this no contact period is August 1st through August 31st. So just keep that in mind. If a school coach does want to coach outside of the season, they could not do this during the no contact period, and any time outside of the no contact period, and then those summer months, they are still limited to that 50% limitation of players from the same school on the same non-school team roster.
And when considering what coaches can or cannot do in the off season, it's always important to make the distinction between team sports and individual sports. Generally speaking, most of the items we've touched on here in terms of out of season regulations are only related to team sports. Individual sports, by comparison, are much less regulated and restrictive than what team sports are by our governance. So your sports of wrestling and golf and gymnastics and swimming, those sports are individual sports and follow a different set of out of season regulations. So anytime you get an inquiry from a coach or parent or student athlete, it's always important to make that fork in the road, or we talk about a team sport or an individual sport, and then being able to cite the proper regulations as needed.
And you're probably listening to that main sport regulation of, how am I as a school administrator going to approach this with student athletes and parents that are, it's what they're doing on the weekends, or it's what they're doing out of season. You're probably thinking, how am I going to control this for 100 student athletes? We know that you are going to have oversight on their weekend activities, that kind of thing. But that's why the education and the prevention is so important, since there is a penalty. So just for your knowledge, we do cover these in our state rules meetings, which are required for all head coaches. This would be a great topic to address in your preseason parent meetings. And we also continually remind our coaches about this in our coaches memos. But I think this is a topic that you just can't educate enough towards your coaches, student athletes, and parents. And if you do hear that a player violated or a coach violated this sport regulation, please just report that to us. We really appreciate you working with us to self-report these items. And I think at the end of the day, it really benefits you all as well, because you may have done that education and the student athlete or the parents went and participated on a non-school team during the season anyway. Why I think this helps you is it shows, no, there is a penalty, and we can take the blame on that one. You guys don't have to be the bad guy by enforcing that rule. And also, if you're getting any questions of, could this be permitted? Just reach out to the sport administrator. We're more than happy to help. And Kristen covered bylaw 9, but a few things I did want to note, as she mentioned, you must fill out a form now to travel to a non-bordering state only. A bit of general information as you're thinking about contests with out-of-state schools. If you're traveling to a bordering state, this is permitted an unlimited number of times throughout the season. You are permitted to miss school time, and you do not have to fill out the form. However, you do have to fill out the form if you're traveling to a non-bordering state. And also, this is only permitted one time per season. However, just general information, if you are scheduling contests with out-of-state schools, you cannot travel out of state for practice only. It must be for a scrimmage or contest, and you could practice for that scrimmage or contest. But one of the biggest components as well is the contest that you are participating in with an out-of-state school must be classified the same for both schools. So for example, if your baseball team's traveling to Florida, it must be, and you are counting it as a scrimmage because it's your spring break trip is before the start of the season when contests are allowed. it must be a scrimmage for both the school, your school, and the school that you're competing against. So it can't be a scrimmage on your schedule and a game on their schedule. So just keep that in mind. And when you're traveling to out of states to participate in scrimmages or contests.
This information will be shared with all of your head coaches during their respective online state rule interpretation meetings, but it is important to touch base with all of your head coaches in advance of their season and any planned travel, especially to non-contiguous states.
And that was just a brief synopsis of what I would say where we get most of our questions. So we wanted to cover those resources and some of the sport regulations and bylaws that we deal with most with all of you.
Ron, any questions from the attendees?
Yeah, thanks for checking. So we do have one that came in. They ask, if an athlete is participating currently in the sport of basketball, are they permitted to try out for a select soccer team, but not for a basketball team, since that's the current sport they're participating in?
That's a great question, and I should have mentioned that. So the out-of-state regulations are for the specific sport only, so out of season. So if you have a player who's currently playing on the soccer team, but he wants to play on an AU basketball team at this time or participate in a tryout, that would be permitted since they are separate sports.
Perfect. Thanks, Emily. So we do not have any other questions. Anything else you guys wanted to touch on before we move over to me and MyOHSAA?
That was all.
Perfect. Thank you both. Appreciate you being on. So to wrap up, we're going to quickly cover a couple of screens within MyOHSAA. And I'll go ahead and share my screen now so that you can see kind of how we're navigating MyOHSAA as well. So as we talked at the beginning, my name is Ronald Sayers. I am the manager of membership and compliance with the association now. So I will be handling questions regarding MyOHSAA, as well as continuing to handle questions regarding Arbiter. We're not going to go over Arbiter today. We are actually hosting a few trainings on Arbiter. Actually, we've already hosted 2. We have one more coming up that is starting tomorrow. If you have questions or want to register for that training tomorrow, you're more than welcome to email me and I can get you that registration link. Those are all taking place virtually and are being hosted by Arbiter, so they've been extremely beneficial to those folks that were able to join. If you're not able to join, we will also have those videos for those trainings as well. So at some point you can take in that information regardless of whether or not you're available for that. So for MyOHSAA, we'll cover 3 screens today really quickly. I don't want to keep you all too much longer. We're coming up on the 2-hour mark of just straight information, so I'll try to be brief in these, but if you do have questions, as you've done throughout the presentation, please put those in the Q&A. So when you log into MyOHSAA, this is going to be the first screen that you land on. This is your dashboard. I should note, if you do not have login to MyOHSAA as either a new school administrator or if you're going to a new school, please email me so I can give you a hand in getting into MyOHSAA and connected with your school so that you can take care of the items that are pertinent throughout the entire year. In order to access your school account, you'll click on the schools icon in the upper right-hand corner. That will take you to a new page, and we'll click on the Ohio High School Athletic Association test account, and we'll go through that pretty briefly. Again, we're not going to go through all of the links on the left-hand side here, as there are quite a bit, and I don't want to keep you for about another hour or so, but we'll touch on the 3 most important items that I believe each school needs to check probably weekly within their MyOHSAA account. Those 3 items are staff management, their sports offered, and their tournament entry. The first item is your staff management, and you should have received an email from me yesterday or the day before, I can't quite recall, explaining staff management and the things that need to be checked, especially right now. You heard Kristen talk earlier about the emergency referendum item, and it's an extremely important piece of that referendum item to have your building principal listed within your school's account. They are the individuals that are required to vote on that referendum item, and they have to be listed in MyOHSAA in order to do so. So when you access your school account, you should see your building principal listed here in black text. If they're listed in red text, they'll likely have some items that they have to take care of prior to gaining full access to the account itself. Those items include verifying email, changing address, or changing their password, or updating their physical address, mailing address, personal information. So please have them log in and make sure that they have all those things up to date, and then they'll be able to vote starting tomorrow. But moving down on your staff management page, you'll see a list of individuals, or you should see a list of individuals that have been added to the account already. There are 3 individuals who must be added to each school account. Those are your principal that we already talked about, your athletic administrator, and your head coaches for each of your varsity sports that you sponsor. The reason that you need to have your head coaches listed is 1, so they do the state rules meetings appropriately for their sport. 2, so that they receive that information that comes from sport administrators like Emily, John, Kate, Tyler, Bo, and myself. So again, you want to make sure that those folks are listed with active email addresses and making sure that they're up to date. They'll also have some other items that they take care of, including rating of contest officials for each of their games. And then we also place some information into the MyOHSAA system, such as surveys and polls that will be presented directly to them. So again, make sure that your head coaches are listed there for each of your varsity sports. Beyond that, you're more than welcome to list any number of people into the system that you want to keep track of. Again, that's just up to you. But again, those 3 individuals that we talked about are required to be listed there. In order to add a new staff member, you would click on this green Add New Staff button, as it says. On that new page, you'll be directed to, you'll see 3 boxes of information that must be entered. So first name, last name, and email address. For email address, make sure you're using one that is active for the coach or for the individual that you're adding. For individuals that are principals, athletic administrators, assistant ADs, assistant principals, athletic secretaries, whatever it may be, you would likely want to use their school email address. For your coaches that aren't necessarily teachers, but are just members of the public who you've hired to coach your teams, you can use either the school email address or you can use a personal email address. That's just up to you to decide with your coach. Once you input that information, you'll use these radio boxes to select the appropriate role that they are taking within the school. And you can select more than one role. So sometimes we do have principals and athletic directors doing those 2 jobs. So you would want to select those individuals for those specific roles. You'll have head coaches that are head coaches for multiple sports, and then they may be also an assistant coach for a different sport. So you can select as many as you need to, depending on the role that those people are taking in your office or in your department. Once you fill out that information, you'll click the Invite New Staff button, and there will be one of 2 things that actually occurs within your system at that point. You'll either be directed back to this page, and on there you'll see a new line of text that is invited staff members. If this occurs, this means that individual does not have an account within the MyOHSAA system under that email address. They'll then be receiving an email from info@myohsa.org. They'll have to go through the process of creating accounts, and once they finish all the appropriate steps, they'll be linked to your school account and will have access to the necessary features. The second thing that would occur is linking an individual who has already created an account. You'll receive a pop-up that will ask if this is the individual you want to link. This basically just means they've already created an account under that email address, and they'll be able to just be linked to the school account with the same login information they've already been using for whatever reason. So again, those are the 2 options, and then they'll be listed here. All of your individuals should be listed in green text for the link here, and then black text for their roles. This means their account is in good standing and they don't have any items to take care of. If you see anything in red text, this again means that they would have to go in and complete any type of updating of their password, any updates of their personal information, so on and so forth. So please have those people log in and complete that information so they have access to the account appropriately. Additionally, within your staff management page, you'll be able to adjust roles within the system. So if you click on the drop down next to the individual, you'll see 3 buttons. You should see 3. I have a couple other ones, but for your purposes, you'll see 3. You'll see view, which will just pull up their personal information. You'll see edit roles and remove. Remove is pretty self-explanatory. This will just remove them from your school accounts. It won't delete their account completely from the system. It will just unlink them from the school account. But if you do want to edit information with regard to the coach's roles, you can do so. Do take note as well, all of the information at the top here is not able to be edited. Every single individual needs to update their information themselves. So I cannot go in and edit the information of Kristen Ronay, who is a coach within my school. That's for security purposes. So if Kristen does have an update on her address or of her email address, she'll have to go in and update that herself. But for the roles piece, you'll see a very similar page to what we saw when we were inviting the staff member. You would just go in and unclick the items that they need to be unclicked, or click on the items that need to be added. So if Kate's going to be now an assistant coach for the boys baseball team, we would simply click that and click update. That will then just update her roles, and they would be listed here. Again, so those are the couple of items that you can do within that staff management page on MyOHSAA. Additionally, one thing I'll note before moving on that you can see at the top here, ooh, that highlighted everything, but those red video buttons with the green links there, those are small how-to videos that will give you some insight into how to complete things throughout the system. So you'll see those in most all of the links that are on that left pane. Within the MyOHSAA system. Those videos are about 1 minute to 1:30, some even shorter than that, maybe a couple that are a little bit longer, but no more than 3 minutes at all. Those, again, were created a couple of years ago, and those are really, really helpful videos if you need to get something done pretty quickly. However, if you do watch that video and you still have questions, you're always welcome to reach out to myself or to the membership services at OHSAA.org email. Either one of those would work, and you'll be able to get some assistance pretty quickly after it. Moving down to the second link that we're going to cover today is your sports offered page. So sports offered is where you're going to indicate what sports that you're sponsoring for this school year. And these are the sports that have been approved by your Board of Education and that you're going to be recognizing throughout the entire school year. There's a couple of reasons that you want to make sure that these are linked appropriately. The first is to unlock tournament entry. So if you do have individuals that are participating in these sports and they want to participate in the tournament later on, you will want to make sure that they are marked in here so that you can mark the tournament entry as yes, so that they can, again, participate at the end of the year. Additionally, this marking these will provide you access to the catastrophic insurance that is provided by our association. Not having a sport marked means they will not be covered by the catastrophic insurance, even if you are sponsoring that sport. If something were to happen and this sport was not marked and indicated to us, then unfortunately it would not be covered under the catastrophic insurance. And then additionally, this is the same list that we're going to be pulling information from with regard to your membership dues. So the sports that are marked are the ones that are going to be billed for. So these will help us provide accurate invoices whenever we do get those out here later on in the year. Moving down, you'll see non-recognized sports. This non-recognized sport piece is actually built based off of the NFHS survey. Which is another link you would see over here. But we do ask that you go through and mark non-recognized sports. It's not required. We're just requesting it. It would be it helps us determine if there are sports throughout the state that we should be considering bringing on as the OHSAA. So if we see 250 schools that are sponsoring boys archery, maybe we need to consider sponsoring boys archery as an OHSAA sport, so that could be affiliated with an OHSAA tournament and so on and so forth. So that does help us, but again, it's not required, but we do ask that you do it. One that we do require that you mark under non-recognized is sideline cheer for girls and boys. If you have both. Again, those individuals are covered under catastrophic insurance because they are participating at some recognized sports, mainly football and basketball, but any other sports that you send them to. So you want to make sure that is marked. So once you mark all of the sports using the radio boxes on the left side of the text, you'll click save here at the bottom, and that will update appropriately. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Just make sure that the sports that you recognize and that have been approved by your Board of Education are marked here. And then moving down, like we had talked about a little bit earlier, once those sports are marked, it will unlock the tournament entry for that sport. So this is where you can see a couple of pieces of information. In order to edit the information on this page, you'll click that green edit button at the top, and this will bring you to a brand new page that you can't navigate away from without actually hitting the bottom exit or authorize and submit button. So that is helpful. But on this page, you'll see the name of the sport, the drop down menu, which will give you the options to select no, and then for individual sports, you'll see yes with a lower number, and then yes with a higher number. Those just indicate whether or not you're entering individuals or team into the tournament based on the playing rules or sport regulations that are set forth. This helps your district athletic board put together the appropriate format for the tournament and assigning those individuals or teams to the appropriate sites when that time does come. For team sports, you'll just see simple yes or no. So again, you need to make sure that these are marked in order for you to get into the tournament at the end of the year. On the right side, you'll notice the tournament entry withdrawal deadline. So this is the final date in which you can edit this information. So on September 13th, which is our earliest date for golf, you will no longer be able to edit this information on September 14th. After that point, there is a small window of time in which you can enter or withdraw the tournament late with a fine. So that fine is $50 typically. So for golf, it's probably going to be from September 13th, or I'm sorry, September 14th to about September 18th or so, in which you can enter and withdraw from that tournament with a fine. After that period ends, so after September 18th, and again, I'm not 100% positive on that date, but that's typically right around where it is. You will not be able to enter the tournament any longer, just because draw dates will have occurred, assignments will have been made, so on and so forth. You will be able to withdraw from that tournament. However, there does come a larger fine with that after that kind of final date. But we do take each of those instances under consideration, especially if there are extenuating circumstances that cause that withdrawal. Obviously, for the past year, we've been dealing with COVID at this point. So we know that there are situations in which teams may have to withdraw because of a COVID situation. We've had injuries before, and some of those have been taken into consideration with regard to waiving a fine. So if that does occur, please reach out to our office. Don't reach out to your district athletic board. That information needs to come to myself and our team here so that we can go through that information with you and ultimately determine where or if a fine could be waived. So again, once you select the appropriate information here on the drop down, you'll go down, you'll read the authorization and certification, at least you should read it. Then you would click the radio button here. I've read and accept the above tournament participation requirements, and then you would click authorize and submit. I'll just go ahead and exit here. But what that'll do is it'll generate an email, and it will send that email directly to support@ohsaa.org, which I get, and then I will forward that information to our district athletic board so that they can update that information on our end or on their end so that they can make the assignments appropriately. Okay. So those are the three big pieces that I wanted to cover with MyOHSAA today. Again, staff management, sports offer, and tournament entry are all extremely important. So please make sure that those are up to date. The one other thing that I will mention as well is the MyOHSAA checklist. So this is developed each year. We ask that you print this out and place this within a kind of eye shot of your desk area. And in order to kind of keep in the quote unquote good graces of MyOHSAA, good graces of the OHSAA, we recommend that you go through this twice a month. If you do so, it's not going to take you very long at all to go through this, especially if everything is pretty much up to date. You just want to check and make sure that everything is done through this checklist. And if you do so, it will help you avoid fines. It will make sure that you're in the tournaments you need to be in. It will make sure that you're getting the catastrophic insurance that's required, and so on and so forth. So print this out or put it on or download it so where you can mark it again every couple of weeks throughout the month so that you can make sure that you're again in our good graces. So I will finish my OHSAA points right now and kind of move on to wrapping up and taking a look. We don't have any other questions. So at this time, I will let you all kind of move on and with the remainder of your day. Again, we appreciate you taking the time to sit with us over the last couple of hours and take in this information that we feel is important with regard to the school year and kind of what you're moving through. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to any one of us in our office. Sport management, compliance, operations with Kim, even reach out to Doug if you have any questions there as well. He's always happy to answer questions or pass those along to the appropriate individuals. But again, we appreciate your time. We appreciate you being with us. We will get an email out with several groups of the slides, and then we will also post this video to our YouTube page, and we will send that link out as well once that has completed its upload. It does take a little bit of time, but we will get that out when it finishes. But again, thank you so much. Best of luck with the remainder of the week. Best of luck with the school year, and I'm sure we'll talk to a good majority of you soon. Thanks again.